Welcome to the channel. My name is Valkyrie of Valkyrie of the Veil is like the easy English translation or like version of that. Hello, hi, welcome. It's so good to have you here. We are talking about Mars retrograde today. This is a part of a bigger retrograde series. So if you are curious about other retrogrades, we've gone over Mercury, we've gone over Venus, and now we're doing Mars. So this is the Mars retrograde video. If you would like to receive updates about the podcast and all the other transit stuff that I do, sign up for the blog. Shout out to that. The Book of Spells 2, Poetry for the Warrior Witch, is coming out on Halloween this year, so I'll put links to the pre-order stuff below. Halloween's my birthday too, so if you decide to do that, thank you for celebrating with me. It's so good. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Any other valid updates, any other updates that need to be, you'll find them below. Beautiful. So let's get into Mars retrograde then. Thank you for listening to my updates and yapping. Mars retrograde it's a retrograde that lasts about 8 to 11 weeks, and it's on a 2-year cycle, so they don't happen. Oh, there's a cat there. What? Dude, I had claws in my bag just now, so anyways, Mars retrograde. It's about 2 years, about every 2 years it happens, and it lasts for about 8 to 11 weeks. We have Venus retrograde doesn't happen that often either, so both Venus and Mars retrogrades, they happen semi-infrequently, to be honest. And I'm kind of grateful that Mars retrograde does not happen that often, because you mean to tell me that we have to backtrack on strategy? We have to reconsider our strategy. We have to reconsider who's our enemy. We have to reconsider our priorities. We have to reconsider our safeties. I'm really grateful they don't happen that often. Mars direct in a chart is like, we have the strategy, we have the priority, we have everything figured out that we need to. But Mars retrograde in a chart is like, actually, let me backtrack on the strategy. We have to double check everything. We can't go forward until we make sure. We can't make the move until I double check this. We can't do it until I know totally and completely that everything is going to be all right. The lessons in a Mars retrograde are a lot more harsh, a lot more difficult than a Mars direct. Especially if you are someone who has Saturn in Aries or any Aries placements. I say Saturn in Aries because as I'm filming this, people who have a Saturn in Aries are preparing for their Saturn return. So shout out to you. It's coming very soon. It is what it is. Any Aries placements, any Scorpio placements. Aries and Scorpio are both ruled by Mars, so they're going to be the most affected, the signs that are most affected by Mars retrogrades. And anything that you have placed in those spaces, anything that's placed also in the 8th house or the 1st house, the 1st house is modernly ruled by Aries. The 8th house is going to be modernly ruled by Scorpio. This also means too that Pluto, depending upon your personal chart, Pluto might become affected by Mars retrogrades as well. So just, keep a lookout for that in your chart and see for yourself, like, if it is affected, it might be, it might not be. It depends on how it's aspecting your Pluto, your Mars placement, if you have any Scorpio placements, your 8th house stuff. So if you can find a connection in your chart of Mars and Pluto that you think might be affected by a Mars retrograde, then probably it will be. Say that you have an Aries retrograde placement or a Scorpio retrograde placement. Those are also going to be heavily affected by Mars retrogrades because they're ruled by Mars. Those placements in Aries and Scorpio would be ruled by Mars. So even if your Mars is direct in your chart, and if there is a retrograde in one of the Aries or Scorpio places, then it would still be a retrograde of Mars. It's just not Mars that's retrograde. It would be something that's ruled by Mars. One of the things about Mars too is that it can attract enemies or it can attract alliances. It's very prioritizing, like, what is important, who is important, how is that important, where is it important, does it need to be important right now, or can it be important later? And maybe if it's not important right now, it won't ever be important. During a Mars retrograde, we also find that either the enemies get flushed out. It's like, oh, we have the clarity of like this person or this place. Like these things do not need to be a priority anymore for a specific reason. So when there's Mars retrogrades, we find that those kind of like things come out of the shadows. It's like, oh, I see the truth of this person now. Oh, I see the reason that they do this. Oh, I see that they are not supposed to be my priority, but I have been making them a priority. Let us remove that. Let us ward that out. Let us take that out of the picture so that we can become a new person and we have a different priority and a different strategy. That's something that Mars can do. But because it is Mars, sometimes it can be harsher, like it can feel harsher. And what do I mean by harsher? You might realize that that person is not a priority because they do betray you. during a Mars retrograde. You're like, oh, wait a minute, you've been doing this the whole time. I just didn't see it until now. That could be a part of the energy. People with a Mars retrograde in their chart are, if you lean into it, you can get really good at identifying who is who and why they're there and what their priorities are, because Mars retrograde requires that you sit and spend more time, if it's in your personal chart, that you sit and spend more time thinking about your strategy and understanding your strategy and really like collecting the information so that you can have a strategy that's useful for you. The house that Mars is in for you is going to be where that strategy is prioritized. If you are looking at your astrology chart, your birth chart, and you're looking at like a transit chart or someone else's birth chart, or however you find this information, okay, the house that Mars is in is going to be the house that needs to be kind of like a home base. The home base, it's going to be the space where if you're able to protect that, usually everything else in your life is also protected, because Mars is not just about battle, strategy, victory, war. It is also about how can we bring in more? How can we bring in more? How can we have more harvest? How can we have more guardianship? How can there be more protection? One of the things that I love about Mars is that if you're able, most of the time, if you're able to prioritize really well, especially where Mars is in your chart, you have it prioritized, everything is good, you have it on lock, you understand how to move people out of that space if they don't need to be there, and like you understand who the enemies are, and you got the boundaries up pretty good, okay, everything's moving smoothly. More than likely there's going to be more harvest for you, because that's the other part of Mars, is that it guards our harvest. It is the spirit, thank you Mars, love you. It is the spirit that guards our harvest and allows us to bring in more harvest, and that is such value. Hello, hi. And also too, one of the things about Mars is that we couldn't go off into battle or defend ourselves if we don't have the resources to do so. So understanding what resources we do need and we don't need, that's also a part of a Mars retrograde, is you might realize you don't have a resource that you need, and you might have to go and either create that, or you're having to walk out without that resource. Sometimes that's a little bit scary. Sometimes that's a little bit, ooh, didn't mean to do that, wasn't prepared for that. That's also a Mars retrograde, is like realizing how we are not prepared, realizing how our strategy has maybe left us open and not guarded in some ways. One of the things that I recommend for a Mars retrograde or during a Mars retrograde, find a place to retreat. Go to where Mars is in the chart and retreat there. So the house that Mars is in, okay, if you have any heavy Aries or Scorpio placements, go and retreat, spend more time in those areas, go and strategize in those, spend more time in those places, go and spend more energy in those places. And that retreat, the conserving and preserving, will also help to bring barriers of defense so that you're not having to, accidentally end up in some sort of striking situation where you would have to defend yourself because you were not in the areas where Mars is. Mars will protect you if you decide to sit with it most of the time, if you are prepared for that protection. It's not just going to protect you because you decided to show up. You also have to show up with the tools necessary. That's a little bit about Mars and a little bit about Mars retrograde. One of the things that I am kind of regarding in this series about retrogrades is that retrogrades have to do with our ancestral lineage. They have to do with the ancestors. Retrogrades are literally, the planet looks like it's moving backwards in the sky. Your birth chart's when you were born. So what's happening before you're born? That's a bunch of ancestral magic, mother, father work. It's like the birthing process, right? So if you find that Mars is retrograde in your chart, or we're going through a Mars transit that is retrograde, more than likely there's going to be strategies of the ancestors that come up that either no longer work for you or you realize have left you unprotected somehow. There could be different areas in your life where maybe you are not actually receiving the protection that you need. Like you're receiving protection, but it's not the protection that would allow you to succeed within your priorities or succeed within your strategies. And so it's some sort of something that has come before you ancestrally that actually no longer works. Like it worked at one point as a strategy, as a victory process, but for whatever reason, it doesn't work now. And so in that way with Mars, we sometimes have to be a little bit innovative, although Mars does ask us to stick to what works. So recognizing when we do need to let go, it is a ruler of Scorpio. So when do we need to let go of the strategies? When do we need to let go of the priorities? And usually Mars in Scorpio, Scorpio is all about the death and the rebirth. So if you let go of it, you're probably not going to get it back. One of the things that a Mars retrograde teaches us is that our ancestors don't always have our answers. If you have any Mars retrograde energy in your chart, probably you are not going to be able to follow the path that has been laid out before you from the ancestors. Probably you're going to have to do a whole bunch of stuff differently, and you're going to have to figure out a lot of stuff by yourself, for yourself. Mars ruling over Aries is like our primal beginnings. It's the innocence, it's the youth, it's the children. And so we kind of, if there's Mars retrograde in the chart, then it can be a lot of like floundering and just having to figure stuff out on your own and by yourself. If you're looking to the areas where Aries is specifically in your chart, and there's Mars retrograde relations within your astrology chart or within the transits that are going on, then you probably are working with healing the fact that you had to do it by yourself, or really creating a path that works for you that no one else has gone through. And that can be sort of daunting and confusing at times, because if you're looking at everything that's been done before you, you don't have any role models, you don't have any examples, you don't have anyone who could be the person who was a leader at one point to show you what to do. You just know what not to do. And probably the people before you only had examples of what not to do too, or more examples of what not to do also. Ancestral connections usually are more than just a generation. They're usually an accumulation of many generations. So there are probably, if there's Mars retrograde in your chart, probably many people who come before you who didn't have good examples. And so one of the callings of a Mars retrograde in the chart is also become the example, become the leader, become the person that people can follow. And whether that be, you know, in your love life, in your business life, in your hierarchies, in your home, wherever Aries and Scorpio are and Mars is for you in your chart, especially if you have a Mars in the first house, oh my goodness, that is a leadership placement for sure. And if there's any Mars retrograde energy at all, it's like, okay, well, I can't be a leader like anybody who's come before me. And one of the things about that is that there's pushback. When leaders do things differently and there's changes in the systems, or there's changes in the relations of how those structural orders are set up, that's going to be more of like Saturn related, but still connected. So like 10th house, 11th house Saturn energy, if that's related to your Mars. But also, again, Mars in the first house. Having there be changes, like leaders who make change are always going to face some form of resistance. And so Mars asks, it's the spark. So it asks that we be consistent and persistent about those sparkings and allow us to lead ourselves even when it's dark, because if we can light that spark, if you have that leadership essence or quality to your chart, or it's in the transits that we're going through, if you're able to light that spark and you can do it over and over and over again, then you're setting the example. Also, you're setting the example for people to follow. Oh, I've seen this person light this spark this way, and because I've seen it, I now understand a reception of how it could be. Now let me look at me. How does that work for me? Mars retrograde people are going to be the leaders who last for longer than they're around. Like their words will last for longer than they're around. There's going to be, you know, like generations that are affected by the leadership of Mars retrograde people. And also too, when we're going through Mars retrograde transits, it's like great times of change within our leadership structures, within our societal structures, and not just the structures of society, but like the leaders in society. There's really great change that happens when we go through Mars retrograde. We do have a Mars retrograde as I'm filming this year. December 6th, Mars retrograde in Leo starts. Mars retrograde starts at the end of 2024 for this filming of this video, and it'll go into 2025, the beginning of 2025, and it will retrograde back into Cancer. So we have a lot of change happening within our leadership and within our strategies on a societal level. That I think is going to be very interesting to see play out. I have some extra thoughts on that, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. So it is what it is. Also too, one of the things to note is that Mars rules over through Aries, the head, and Mars through Scorpio rules over our reproductive system. So if you are someone who has heavy Mars placements or Mars retrograde placements, this is kind of both of them, but I think it's important, especially for Mars retrograde people, because there's more power that's offered to Mars retrograde people, but they have to work harder for it. Become very familiar with the connection between your head and, you know, the places of the body unspoken about normally and that we don't normally talk about. If you're able to really understand the connection about those two different places and the connection between your Scorpio placements and your Aries placements, again, Aries is the head, Scorpio is what is unsaid about the bed. It is. If you're able to relate the two of them for you, because the other thing about Scorpio is that it's secrets, and so it requires that we understand in the hushed energy where we don't talk about it with anybody else. So if you can relate those for yourself and understand that for yourself, there's a lot more power offered to you through Mars. And also in that power, there is more strategization, more priorities, more. You'll be able to rework stuff in your life so that there aren't enemies around you and that you have the strategies that you need. Because it's, again, not just about battle and war and things like that. It's also about getting what you want. Thank you, Mars. So if you're looking for something, you want to go after something, Mars is a great placement to sit with and really like activate. Mars retrograde could also ask us to sit with strategies before, like what have you done before? That's going to work probably again. And if not, then let the whole strategy go probably and start something new. So lots of Mars retrograde, gratitude, reverence, and love to you. Keep up your brew, keep doing what you need to do. And thank you for coming to support me. Thank you for being here. That is beautiful. I'm so grateful for it. Everything has been really, really well recently in my spaces on the internet. So I just want to say thanks. Thank you so much. Keep it up. I'll talk to you next time. That's true.